Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
You to give permission, maybe it will, maybe it won't. But
Yep.
we are talking today with Christopher Sweat, who is a philosopher, a thinker, someone that I met online. As I've met most of my friends and contacts in the last 10 years, there's some friends I haven't ever met in person, probably never will. Some live as far away as Uganda, Egypt, whatever. But today, Chris, it's a pleasure to be talking one-on-one again.
Yeah, you too. And the internet's a powerful place, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really amazing. I have guys that and gals that apply for jobs to work on different projects or internship. Never met them. I don't know if they're male or female. I know nothing about them. And I'm sending them money, and they could be bots for all I know. But Chris, you're a remarkable intellect, and I know you don't feel that word is completely free from maybe overburdensome character. So I want to talk about intellectual and being on the internet in this day and age. But I just want to point out that I have really utmost respect for you going back to school as you are now, one of my in some sense rival institutions, because UC Boulder gets some of the best students in the world, and I'm sometimes fighting against them to get people like you and get people like my graduate students. But anyway, man, thank you so much for coming, and thank you for the effort that you're putting into just your dreams and what you're trying to do. And we're going to talk about all your cool projects, but I wanted you to introduce yourself. What's your world line, as we say in physics? What got you to this point? From where did you come? Your origin story in the science fiction sense. Tell my audience who might not be as familiar with you from your online work as I am.
Yeah, 100%. I think I think I started out as a tinkerer, as a lot of thinkers or experimenters kind of started out. And I got really lucky that my tinkering started like around the time that broadband internet was coming out. Which doesn't seem like an advanced invention these days. And it probably doesn't seem that advanced for some of your young listeners, but that was a huge deal. I was like 10 or 11 years old. So my tinkering started with just like simple wireless networks and computers. And that moved into racing simulators, which is like a whole quest. We could do a whole episode talking about racing simulators, which I feel like it's still kind of an underground scene. And I think through this different kind of experimentation I was doing as a young person, I got to see how different systems interacted with other systems. And I got addicted to it. I liked to be able to test things in what I guess was somewhat of a controlled space or controlled environment. And I like to push the boundaries. I like to push the envelope. And I think my adult life has been about harnessing my need or desire to push the envelope and to take my experiments or take my perspective or understanding and boil it into something that's useful or practical, in a few different contexts.
Yeah,
so
it's a rare skill, when I'm looking for interns or working for students or even graduate students sometimes, they'll say, well, I don't have any experience, in the lab. But my dad had a welding shop in Akron, Ohio. I'm like, that's awesome, for experimental physics, which is very different from theoretical physics or theoretical science and experimental science. But I think I'm curious, do you think we're losing a lot of that? Like, I have a car that was, like a Toyota Sienna minivan. I don't know if you're a dad yet or have any plans.
Yeah.
I got a bunch of kids, and you got to get a minivan, or else, one of my friends is like, before you have kids, if you get a minivan, you're a weirdo. But after you have kids and you don't get a minivan, you're even more weird. I tried to open the hood on that thing once, and I couldn't do a damn thing. And I used to tinker with my first car, as the 1970s Volkswagen. I could do a brake job. Do you think we're losing some of that because of the kind of relentless advance of technology, of which you're playing a big part in? Do you think we're losing some of the ability to even get under the hood, literally or figuratively?
Yeah, the automation, it seems like the more automation that exists, the further we are from the basic processes that are taking place. Like, just a simple example of this, and maybe you can give us a physics tie back, but think about like power steering. And a lot of people don't realize this, but there are like old school, like rack and pinion type steering mechanisms where the steering wheel is actually having a direct impact on the wheels that are on the ground when you do any kind of steering input. But now a lot of cars have like what's called like a hydroelectric power steering. And it's actually not responding directly to the wheels. There's a part of the system that is in between the steering wheel and the actual drive wheels. So you can't feel the wheels on the ground in the steering wheel anymore. And again, obviously, you could rotate it from lock to lock with your pinky finger. That's fucking sweet. And you don't have to be doing 20 or 30 miles an hour to turn comfortably, you know, and there's people that may not even understand what I'm talking about. Hopefully you're following Brian.
Yeah.
But it seems like the more automation that comes into these different systems, the further we like, you know, the average human being gets away from, you know, the processes that are going on because they're not involved in them anymore.
Yeah. And I think it's true in the aviation industry. You know, I fly little planes around, and you know, certainly true that automation, you know, fly by wire, all these things kind of harkens back to, you know, in the space race. There's a great book called Digital Apollo from MIT, professor of aerospace engineering. He talks about, I forget the man's name, but he talks about how all the Lunar Command Module pilots, the guys who were landing, you know, from Neil Armstrong to the last guy, you know, Gene Cernan or whoever, when they landed on the moon, it was fully automated. Even the computer of that time, which everyone says you could fit it in your pocket, you know, the whole that computer could land the module completely safely. But every single time, at the last second, the pilot caught a glimpse of a boulder or a crater that had been uncharted, and he had, because what is the highest expression of a pilot? It's landing, right? You don't applaud like for the pilot in cruise, you know, congratulations. But when they make a good landing, you applaud him or her, right? So. But I feel like we kind of are, as Carl Sagan said, never has society been more dependent on technology and less, you know, kind of comprehending of that technology and science. Do you feel like that's kind of a positive thing or a negative thing? In other words, like, can we just remove people from having to understand? I mean, I don't understand even, you know, they say that actually, Chris, I don't know if you ever heard of it. They say that there's no person on earth who can do or understand all the steps needed to make a pencil. Like just a yellow pencil, right? All the different. So do you think that's a good thing? Like I don't need to know how a pencil's made to use it, but do you think there's, you know, virtue to that, or is it leading us in a dangerous place?
I mean, I probably have still what's like considered an underground opinion on this, but I guess automation ties into labor. And that I've heard people make these arguments that the more automation that is created, the more different types of processes that exist, they think that we're entering this era of like hyper specialization, which they think is potentially detrimental because it'll make it to where at some point in some distant future, everyone's job will be so specialized that, you know, it'll just be some specialized repetitious thing. We'll all be like a janitor or a call center employee or something like that. And I don't believe that. I don't think that we're going to have a scenario where we won't still need highly specialized, high skilled labor. But I do think that, my opinion is that the technology is getting away from a lot of people. And I don't like it because when I try to advance or extend thinking, there's a lot of people that are still stuck in an old model that I think like doesn't let the technology have as much room as it needs to produce, I don't know, a more efficient future or a more capable future. And it seems like you have these like special domains like aerospace, or you have these other domains that are like super concentrated on real specific expertise. And those domains can move through these kind of waves of technological advancements in many ways more quickly than domains that have a broader reach, or maybe require more people to be involved, like something silly like some kind of enterprise software like Salesforce, for example. There's millions of people that work in and out of Salesforce. And so you have such a wide variance of skills and abilities in that system, and different environments that it gets deployed into. Whereas like how many spacecraft are, flying on any given Sunday, right?
Exactly. What were you like as a kid? Were you like, the kind of kid who just like wanted to play with chemistry sets and was frustrated because they stopped including radium in those chemistry sets, like when I was a kid? Were you more of a digital tinkerer as you are now? And then, kind of take us back, tell the story of your kind of upbringing, what brought you to this, kind of sense that I think you have the rarest trait of all. Upcoming guest Ryan Holiday is coming on the show to talk about courage. I think it takes a lot of courage to do what you're doing. I don't even think I didn't even know how old you were until you told me. But at any age to do it non-traditional. My mother went back to college, got her bachelor's, her master's in social work. She was in her 50s, 60s. After having me and ruining her academic career. But talk us through that. Where did you get that preternatural courage? Is it inborn? Is it a gift? Is it just based on hard work? Where does that come from? And what were you like? What was your kind of things that fascinated you as a 12-year-old, which I assume plays no small role in who you are now?
Yeah. Okay. Whatever happened to me as a young child, I don't know, because I've always spoken outside of my pay grade or whatever expertise people think should be available to me. Yeah. So like when I was running on this hardcore simulators, everyone was in their 20s and 30s, but I was 11, 12, 13, 14. Some of these people still keep up with me 2 decades later, because apparently they couldn't believe what we were doing, because these simulators took practice, they took tons of iteration. And a lot of people still had to have like some physical reference point, whereas when you're in a simulator, it's all based off of visual reference point. So I was obviously making highly sophisticated inferences with super limited information, right? Which I guess apparently is a unique skill, right?
Yeah.
But I didn't have any academic support, or I wasn't showing any of these traditional markers of intelligence or early success. I was not in any of these gifted programs. Frankly, by the time I got to high school, I didn't care. I think I finished high school with a 1.8 GPA. And some of the classes that I got bad grades in, I'm like, that doesn't even make sense. So there was always this dual life of, I had these interests that I was excelling in that were clearly advanced, right? But the school system, somehow I just slipped through the cracks. I can't explain it. I slipped through the cracks.
Yeah.
So if I look back to when I was young, and it's still like this now, but I think I've always been somewhat of a lone wolf. I have friends from different circles, but I think I've always been somewhat of a lone wolf. I liked mountain biking when I was younger. I listened to my Discman. I would try to get the best skip protection possible so that my CD would keep rotating and I could hear the audio.
Yeah.
And then again, I did so much on the computer that computers and the internet have been second nature to me for as long as I can remember, which is why with COVID or having devices anywhere, all this stuff just feels like what I've always been accustomed to. It doesn't feel like anything new necessarily.
So you weren't like that kid who drove your parents crazy, trying to take the computer, the router apart at home to see if you could speed up the Wi-Fi.
It's wild. I was empowered to do those things. So I have to thank my mom for that. She empowered me to experiment in the areas that, I don't know, she must have noticed I might have had some kind of strength there.
Yeah.
So I was always empowered to tinker around with wireless hardware, computers, bikes, any system that I could get my hands on. But the issue is that a lot of my friends that share some of these characteristics are introverted.
Yes.
And there's only one person in my life that thinks I'm introverted, but she'll figure it out one day. Everyone sees me as hardcore extroverted and super gregarious and outgoing. So I would say I'm probably somewhere in the middle, but I've always been outspoken about what I can see or
Right.
what I'm observing.
And that's the confidence and the courage I spoke about earlier with you. Because
Sure.
a lot of people wouldn't be doing this, getting a bachelor's degree. You're doing what this guy Austin Kleon, I think calls showing your work. Like you're developing stuff in public. And I think
Yep.
that is kind of, it was interesting, and I like to get your take on this, but I've been, my new book is about like the imposter syndrome, overcoming that. But there's like two different sides to that, because it comes from insecurity, like I'm not good enough to do it. But then I was thinking, in an interview, I was just kind of thinking out loud, which is always dangerous, but it's still, I think, has a kernel of truth, that the opposite of the imposter syndrome is also based on insecurity, and that's arrogance. Like when people have like arrogant narcissistic tendencies, I think a lot of times they're really insecure and they're just covering up for it with bravado and bluster. But I think, yeah, this notion of creating in public, of not listening to, I don't care what you think I should do, what my friend James Altucher says, choosing yourself, like who needs these gatekeepers? And that's why I think, again, not to like, make this a love fest, but going back to school, that decision I think is very telling about your character, because a lot of people wait for the gatekeepers. When we're in high school, some of us that got, maybe a 2.8 GPA, not a one, but I mean, I was concerned getting into a good college. Why? So I could go to a good grad school. Why? So I could get a good postdoc. Why? So I could get an assistant professor. Why?
Yeah.
So I could get tenure. Why? So I could, win a Nobel Prize, whatever.
Sure.
But you're not listening to that. So why Boulder? I mean, you were on the East Coast before, right?
Nah, actually, I'm in Washington right now.
I'm sorry, you're in Washington. Yeah, right. Okay.
I'll be in Boulder tomorrow because I still split the time.
Right.
But actually, I grew up until age 10 in the Bay Area, and then I moved to Colorado when I was very young, Colorado Springs.
Mm-hmm.
I actually spent 11 years in Denver Metro. So Boulder is like, my last place in Colorado before putting one in Boulder was at the edge of Boulder County. I probably hung out in Boulder like 3 times a week. I worked in 2014. I worked for an enterprise tech startup in Boulder. Boulder's always been like up the street from me. Yeah, I've got lots of friends in Boulder County. And for me, honestly, I was told by some mentors in the Bay Area that maybe I should be a little bit more ambitious with where I applied. And I heard that. But then I kind of also decided that Boulder is still a respected school in most parts of the country. And I'm pretty sure I'll be able to take whatever I do at Boulder and transfer to top 20 as long as I perform well. But yeah, it's a community I've spent a lot of time in. I actually love that town, as nuanced as it is. There's things I hate about it, but many things that I love about it.
Yeah, it's got kind of the, big city adjacent, but it's got the, small town. It's got the national laboratory, university. I think I could, pretty much exist anywhere there's some kind of college or university. I think you need that, life of the intellectual. And there I want to pivot clumsily to intellectualism. And, one of the first rooms I ever met you on Clubhouse, you're very prolific, was a rant that you were doing, which is the title of your Substack, which we'll put links to in the show notes and refer to. I'm subscribed actually twice under 2 different, so I'm inflating your sub count really, as you deserve. But I met you in a room on Clubhouse a long time ago, or after I met, but I was kind of just really curious and listening in. You had a room titled like, "Can we talk about Black public intellectuals?"
Yep.
And Chris, this is whatever. I'm not going to apologize, but I was like kind of courageous, because you're going out there, and that's like kind of a third rail in the public intellectual. I don't even know what a public like. Would you call me a Jewish intellect? I mean, I know a lot of people that wouldn't say I'm an anti-intellectual, but the point being, it's like such a loaded term, and then you add another kind of loaded term on top of that, Black, and but you're just like unafraid, you'll just take it on. And so I want to talk about that, and then we'll get into your Substack, and specifically your most recent post, which, as a paying subscriber, no, I don't know if I have to pay anything, but you haven't updated in a while, man. You gotta put out a new rant. I'm really jonesing for it. But talk about what is a Black intellectual? Do they exist? Are you one? How does that term make you feel? How do you react to that?
Yeah, no, actually, I've tried to be critical of the idea of a Black intellectual from so many angles now. So we'll have to catch people up in a few short minutes.
Yeah.
But I think that Black intellectual obviously served a purpose in society when there weren't many ways for groups to communicate with these certain parts of the Black community, if you will. Which again, Black is a word that I don't even think entered like the center of the way that we referred to people in America until more recent times, like the last 40 or 50 years, 60 years, I don't know. But there's been this like big idea that like when somebody who is considered Black, which is still loosely defined, speaks about something intellectual, then that person is a Black intellectual. And I think where I get fired up is, like in my comparative politics class at University of Colorado right now, I've got a great professor in that class, but the entire frame of why is the West so rich is about European dominance and how that extended itself with the creation of the United States. And it's basically anchored in this kind of like, all right, white dominance. I'm not going to say supremacy because that's a whole different conversation. I got different opinions on that, but it's all framed in underneath this kind of lens of white dominance. So to me, if I produce something inside of academia, later in my life or in the next couple of years, or if I produce something meaningful out in society, then what I'm creating is considered second class because Black indicates what people have correlated with a marginalized group. And therefore, I can only respond to people that think about something in the vein of Black intellectual, which also makes a bunch of assumptions about how I grew up and what my understanding of Blackness is or isn't. And so I was just frustrated with like the fact that I feel like there are people that fit into this category of Black intellectual that weaponize it, and some of them are younger than me and they've got big channels, or I would get calls from certain people in media and they would box me in with thinkers that they thought fit a category based on race, and I honestly I think that's bullshit. Like, it's a very frustrating thing for me to accept that my thinking, where I'm coming from, is basically second rate when we look at the way that our society is organized and the way that it speaks about class and the way that it speaks about its ability to interact with political institutions. If I think I'm a Black intellectual, and I'm sure, Brian, there's a bunch of ways that we could talk about this, but
yeah, because I often find it. Look, as I've said on my channel many times to Neil deGrasse Tyson, my best friend Stefan Alexander, you've probably heard it. Jim Gates and I talking about it, and I'm like, there's no doubt that Blacks pay the Black tax. I mean, you have to do stuff in academia that I'll never have to do, but and I think there is a burden on me, which I take seriously, and that I want to find as many Black, scientists and people in the technical world, because they have a meritocratic, stance to be on my show or in my sphere of influence, as minuscule or big as that might be. But I also view it as my job. And I've had, I think, more, Black scientists on my show than almost any other podcast I know about. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm just saying, I think we have to do that. Just as I have a moral obligation to communicate to the public, because they pay my salary, what I'm discovering. And I feel more scientists have to do that. So too, the burden is on me, not because I think I'm, supremacist or racist in any way, but I have to go and solicit you. And I have to reach out to you. And I do that. And sometimes I get rejected, by the way. I've asked, Black scientists, no, you've had on, Ben Shapiro, why would I come on your show? Or I've had on, some Black intellectual that they don't like, or Black scientist, whatever. But I feel it's kind of a double-edged thing. Like in academia, we're told that academia is systemically racist. And I don't like that. It's like if I said, well, academia is systemically anti-Semitic. Well, what's the proof of that? Well, people have to work on being anti-Semitic. No, I think that's unfalsifiable. And so when I look at, people that, that are doing so much in the public sphere and they happen to be Black, I really view that as for me, obviously as a white person, I can't identify in the same way as you, but I view that as insignificant. Your intellect is what attracts me to you. And I'd listen to you if you were, whatever race, gender, color, whatever. So I wonder about this notion that you have like people that are spoken of as Black leaders or leaders in the Black community, but you don't hear that about other groups like Jewish like, I don't know. First of all, the old joke is, 2 Jews, there's 3 opinions. And, so how do you react to that statement, that phrase, Black leaders or leader in the Black community? Is that like also kind of monolithizing you and making you define in this way that is anathema to your intellectual accomplishments?
Yeah, it's interesting because I didn't experience this way of talking about race until after George Floyd. So like, I feel like conversations about race were one way for me before George Floyd. And then after George Floyd, which was a horrendous scenario, but I think that goes without saying, but the conversations about race in America seemed to change significantly. Even had friends call and like apologize crying. And I was like, holy shit, like we've been friends for like a decade.
Yeah, right.
What are we talking about? Right. So I've never seen myself as a Black leader. And I think being mixed race is complicated. I actually explore this a little bit in my Substack, A Rant, and I hope to expand on this. I feel like mixed race identity is one that gets taken off the table by people that have more concrete conceptions of self. And the Black-white spectrum, unfortunately, is like at the forefront of political discussions in the United States, even though there are lots of other people that are not white necessarily and definitely aren't Black. So I think I've inherited this like complicated identity that my parents didn't give me any instructions or rule books for how to manage.
Right. Yeah.
And so it makes me straddle this scenario where it's like, when I was younger, it was like, Chris, why are you so Black? And I'm like, the fuck does that mean? And then it would be like, why are you so white? Right. And I'm like, I really don't understand what you people are talking about. And then as I've gotten older and not felt nearly as insecure about my ethnic, racial identity, whatever you want to call it, I've been able to observe it more. And by the way, most people don't think I'm Black, which is fascinating. Wow, it's so incredible. So I get to hear a lot of different viewpoints because I get treated more as a member of the in-group, even if I'm not in that group, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I get to hear a lot of fascinating viewpoints. And I think that I work with a lot of amazing young people, and I've worked on a lot of businesses that I don't talk about, just as like just volunteering, helping out in the community. And maybe some of these great young people are Black, but that's certainly not the conversation that we have when we're building something. Because I think that the term Black again marks this subservience or this like second tier or this bottom class. And that is the last thing that I would want to teach young people to believe about themselves, is that they are inherently less than, because either society says that out loud, or because there are certain structures that are in place that maybe reinforce that. Because again, I still believe that we can disrupt some of this thinking, or we can shift these things in the future. And again, a lot of the rhetoric that comes out about race, it's hard to know how much of it is real or perceived. Even listening to some of the different networks on television, they bring the statistics forth in a way that appeals to their base, but that doesn't necessarily appeal to the truth or the reality. So I think it's had a big impact on the way that I think about politics, but maybe not as much of an impact on how I think about some of the things that I do in the corporate setting.
Mhm. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, I didn't fully appreciate, that it is kind of like a further imposition, and whether it's systemic or not, we could debate or we could discuss. But the point of like, um, by just saying black, whatever with any other, subsequent noun after it, it is an imposition by maybe a dominant culture or whatever. But I feel like, we shouldn't define it, or people shouldn't define it. The problem is anything in life, Eric Weinstein points out, anything is like a spectrum is very hard for the human mind to comprehend, because it's like quantum mechanics. Like, we think classically, but like no one's going to disagree that before your parents met, you didn't exist, and so you couldn't be aborted, say. And then after you're born, no one's going to say, oh well, like he's just a collection of cells. Like, you're 30 years old, right?
Sure.
So the point is, when there's a harmonic, superposition of states, that is ambiguity, and the human mind likes to choose black or white, literally. And that's what I think is responsible for a lot of people of mixed heritage, that they, it's the hardest thing. And actually in the Old Testament, my tradition, you're implored not to be a zealot, not to be too far to the left or too far to the right. And why do you have to be commanded to do something that's natural? Obviously, you don't have to be commanded to love your kids or your puppy. So it must be unnatural to go down the middle. And I see that as a very interesting skill. I want to talk about the newsletter on Substack, Christopher Sweat, a rant, which I double subscribe to. One of the most fascinating posts actually happens to be your last post. Not to put too much pressure on you. I know you got bigger and other stuff that you're involved with, but I found this fascinating. You go back and you talk about what is natural law. What does that really mean? And I think you're intellectually honest enough to trace it to its roots and its heritage, both in ancient Greece, but also back to the God-centered world of Europe in the 1600s, 1700s, John Locke. One thing I want to get your reaction to is the influence that Thomas Jefferson was influenced by Euclid, of all people. So Euclid in his Elements famously says that, such and such, like two parallel lines don't meet. He says that is self-evident. Those words, those are, in other words, you don't even have to prove it. It's so obvious. And the funny thing, Chris, as you probably know, it's not true that two parallel lines don't meet. It only happens in Euclidean flat space, right? So in the universe, it may or may not. So he was actually, not completely right about that. But to say something is self-evident means it's beneath the realm of even having to prove. And yet, Thomas Jefferson, as you know, in the Declaration of Independence, refers to these things. What is natural law? What is being self-evident? And do you think that like politicians should know a little more mathematics than they do now, or at least logic and formal philosophy?
Yeah, 100%. In fact, and we'll see, I think my thoughts are still being discovered on this, but I think that natural law is like the crux of arguments that happen in American politics.
Yes.
If we just stop watching what's on television or in the news media. When I think about the laws of nature, like you were saying, these seem to be like really Christian conceptions of rules or constraints that are placed upon us, I guess you could say, on a basic level. And I think that a lot of people that have thought about natural law over many years make valid points in certain ways. Like maybe it is self-evident that everyone should have access to life, liberty, and justice. Like maybe that, okay, fine. Like we all assume that it's a duh that everyone should have access to these three basic principles of democracy: life, liberty, and justice. Duh. Okay. I think the issue is that natural law is going to exclude people that aren't capable in whatever the current state of the environment is of producing something that creates some kind of value, right? And I think this is where a lot of political conversations break down on the environment or on social justice, is that you have two parties that have different interpretations of these natural constraints, these self-evident things, things that are supposed to be, but maybe aren't. And you've got one side that says it's the Republicans that are preventing us from solving these really meaningful social and environmental issues.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the other side that says it's the Democrats that prevent us from addressing these important issues. And it seems like the Republican thinking in American politics is going to try to trace back to some level of status quo, which means let's keep these things that are self-evident going. Let's not pursue any type of like government intervention. Let's not try to redistribute wealth or disrupt this current structure of existing. But again, if all society have some type of inequity in them, then that way of thinking seems out of line with solving some of what people would say are the most important problems, happening right now, again, around social justice or the environment. But I also think, these, like the left, we call it, which I think is oversimplified and maybe gives too much credit, but like American liberals are pretending that they're constrained by Republicans when in reality they're constrained by the Constitution.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to frame this argument of both of these parties are constrained by this idea of natural law. And it seems like if our law doesn't account for social or environmental constraints, it's no wonder that it can't address social or environmental issues. And again, like when people talk about policy, what are they talking about? They're talking about the government printing money. It's obvious that the government has instituted different policies, like, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 or 1971, for example. 1971 was supposed to integrate schools, but in reality, all it said was that it was illegal to separate people based on race inside of these schools. But that didn't really change the way that society behaved in the environment or the way that people interacted with other groups. It didn't change as much of the thinking as I think people give it credit for. So I'm trying to get to the root of kind of issues that I'm observing, where the Constitution has these ideas that are ambitious and they've been taught to us as self-evident, and which I think is similar to like if you're in a church and you're not allowed to ask questions about the scripture. And for the first time, I'm kind of looking at this and I'm like, okay, there's some real constraints banked into the way that our Constitution set up, and both parties are talking around it. And there also seem to be other more complicated systems that interact with American politicians, the federal government, on a regular basis that add additional complexity. And like you said earlier, I'm exploring this in near real time because I'm trying to kind of balance out like my, like how much I like to write and how much I like to express myself in that medium, but then also still bring some academic rigor, right? I'm not trying to make it just all opinion, if you will.
No, it's erudite, thoroughly researched, is cited, original sources. I love that you're thinking in public and you're writing in public. I think it's the hardest thing to do, but I think in this day and age, it's one of the most valuable things that we can do, not only for ourselves, but for everybody. Yeah, just to reference your point, as I was reading it and thinking about this tension that you keep referring to in that piece, I was thinking about Las Vegas odds bookmakers, because they don't make any money if my kid's little league team plays the vaunted San Diego Padres or your Colorado Rockies. Not doing so hot now, but anyway, but if they play, they're going to get blown out. My kids are going to get crushed, right? So what do? They have a point spread. And what's the analog of the point spread? Nobody makes money unless the point spread is evenly matched. So it boosts up. So what does the media do? They make the narrative equal and not like, oh, it's a tight race and it's bitterly divided and everything. They won't make any money if you're like, oh, it's a total blowout. Like American opinions, like totally against this opinion or this such.
Sure.
In the last 10 minutes or so, you also think and write a lot about finance, future tech, venture capital, things like that. I want to get first of all, I can't resist because it's always in the news, and I've had on guests like Michael Saylor and kind of his evil twin Peter Schiff, who's kind of on the opposite side of things economically. Gold. I don't know what to do, Chris. So what do you think about like all this pace again of technology? Now it's in the currency network effect, not just in social and in online. What do you make of opportunities? I can't resist, asking you about blockchain and so forth. Where do you see this going? And more provocatively, are there opportunities for people in academia like myself to somehow utilize this to the benefit of humanity?
Yeah. Okay. So there are certain things that I won't be able to speak on effectively here because I've distanced myself from a lot of the blockchain hype.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Okay. Like that aside though, obviously I've been listening on a regular basis to the different arguments that people make for not necessarily blockchain, but cryptocurrency to like replace fiat currency. I've been listening to these arguments for 4 or 5 years now. And I have friends that mine and so forth. Mm-hmm. And I have a friend that has stood up a decent mining operation in Kansas City. It's pretty legit looking at like how a mining operation works and how data analytics can play into it and how scientific it can get. So I think like if people can find ways to make money in these new technology environments, they should. Like I would always encourage that. Mm-hmm. I just don't think that it's smart to over-index. And if people are looking at it from an investment perspective, again, not giving any investment advice here, even though I don't have any licenses for that anyway. I don't think anybody should over-index on one asset class if people are making their investments. As far as blockchain goes, again, as with any kind of technology, the more advanced it gets, the more operations it's going to require, like a department of people that are able to support it and have a specific set of skills and capabilities. Mm-hmm. So I'm optimistic, that we'll find ways to integrate these technologies, but trying to integrate the newer technologies, like that being my practice for the last like 7 or 8 years, like something I've been dedicated to. It's not simple, and it's hard to see through the hype.
Yeah.
So, but I'm always optimistic. I just don't think it's smart to over-index. For the people that are making money currently on these different technologies, they should keep doing that.
Mm-hmm. What about talk about venture capital and why does that appeal to you? It seems to me like, again, there's so many barriers to entry. There's so many gatekeepers. It's very hard. Robin Hood, what are we going to do? But talk about it. What does it appeal to you? Why should you turn your, limited amount of time, but vast intellectual capital towards this, relatively challenging modality to at least have some degree of aspirational wealth?
Yeah, no, I think I started my first business when I was 19. And I had some success. We'll talk about it some other time, but it was enough success to make me overconfident. So basically it took me another 8 or 9 years to actually build a decent business that could turn a profit and provide for me. And that was kind of my quest of like understanding as much about business as I possibly could. And come to find out, and this is one of the reasons why I decided to go back to university, but come to find out the access to, technology, the Bay Area, startups, venture capital, the access to these things, the things that are needed to start legitimate entrepreneurial ventures, especially the ones that are in the vein of technology, it's very constricted. And so I had gone in and out of enough tech companies and seen enough iterations of software and seen a lot of companies grow and become very dominant over the last decade, where once they had these like really basic primitive tools that weren't that exciting, and next thing you know, they're like in 80% of the global 2000. And so I wanted to know like why that was happening. What was the trajectory? And I came to learn that venture capital list, their funds, they are not able to manage risk in a systematic way. So they use a hand-waving heuristic to decide where they place their funds. And so they're obviously going to place their funds with people that go to, 10 or 12 universities, and to maybe very rarely outside of that come through certain circles of friends. And because of the way that they make their investments, they need outsized returns, which means that they're only able to invest in companies that have outsized total addressable market, place that they can sell the service to. And I'm like, well, that's interesting that this venture capital that really only can invest in very specific business models and invest only in very specific types of individuals, is considered like this iconic form of American capitalism, which I think couldn't be further from the truth. And so anyways, when I'm speaking about different things, especially being as outspoken as I can around technology or software of the Bay Area, venture capital, I just like to understand like there's a certain capital structure behind these technologies, and it obviously it has a big impact on what these technologies can produce in the near term, and it has a big influence on what's possible down the road. And so I can't look at one part of the system and not try to look at a few other parts of the system to understand what's going on.
Well, Christopher Sweat, we've had a fascinating conversation. I could certainly talk to you for many more hours. I'm looking forward to someday meeting in person. I don't think all relationships should stay online, and I hope to meet you maybe when I'm out at NIST and my colleagues at Boulder.
Yes.
And for now, I just want to encourage everybody to read Chris's Substack, which is phenomenal. And I'd like to get some advice on myself someday about doing a Substack. I haven't started that. I have a newsletter, but not a Substack. So please subscribe to that. Show notes will contain the link information. Follow him on Twitter, Clubhouse, Instagram, LinkedIn, everywhere that social media profiles can be seen. I follow him religiously. And Chris, it's just such a pleasure. I'm so glad you accepted my invitation, and I hope we can have many more conversations online and off. And I just want to congratulate you again. Courage is a rare commodity, and I really, whenever I see kind of you light up on Clubhouse or whatever, it's a must tune in. So keep up the awesome work, my friend.
Thank you so much, Brian. This was fun. I appreciate it.
Have a great rest of your day, and I hope to again see you soon, Chris.
See you soon, Brian.
Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.